A lone black rhino stood at the watering hole, her head down, drinking deeply from the murky water. She didn't see them at first. 20 lions, moving through the grass like a ghost army, silent and coordinated. Some crouched low, their massive bodies nearly invisible in the dry brush. Others fanned out wide, cutting off every escape route. This wasn't random. This wasn't hunger. This was a hunt planned with the precision of a military operation, and she had just become the target. The rhino's name, if rangers could give names to something with scars etched across her body like a map of survival, was Scarface. She had lived 14 years in Kruger National Park, watching lions come and go, fighting poachers, surviving droughts that turned the entire reserve into dust. She had seen things that would break lesser animals, but nothing had prepared her for this. 20 lions. It was a number that shouldn't have existed in the same place at the same time. Lions don't hunt like this. They don't organize across multiple prides, don't put aside territorial disputes and old rivalries to take down a single target. But something had changed in Kruger, something that would alter the entire ecosystem of the reserve. And the answer to why starts not with the rhino, but with the lions that came before her. To understand what we're about to witness, you need to understand the world these lions inherited. Kruger National Park spans nearly 2 million hectares across northeastern South Africa. It's one of the largest game reserves on Earth, home to thousands of lions, thousands more prey animals, and a complex web of power dynamics that shift like sand in a desert wind. For decades, the lions of Kruger had followed predictable patterns. Prides claimed territory, males hunted, females raised cubs. Dominant coalitions held power until younger, stronger males challenged and took over. It was violent, it was brutal, but it was balanced. Then the drought came. 5 years of almost no rain. The grass died first, turning from green to gray to nothing. The waterholes shrank from lakes to ponds to puddles. The prey animals, zebra, wildebeest, impala, moved constantly searching for water and food that barely existed anymore. And when prey disappears, everything else falls apart. The lions of Kruger faced a choice: adapt or starve. Most adapted by competing harder for the remaining kills, hunting smaller animals, fighting more frequently over carcasses. Some left the reserve entirely, wandering into human territory, where they were hunted by farmers protecting livestock. Others did something entirely different. They stopped thinking like individual prides and started thinking like a coalition of coalitions. They united. There was no formal agreement, no moment when the lions gathered and decided to change the rules. But through observation and patience and the simple desperation of starvation, they figured out that hunting together across traditional pride boundaries was far more effective than hunting alone. One coalition would drive prey toward another. Multiple groups would surround a target simultaneously. They learned to communicate through roars and body language across kilometers, coordinating attacks that would have been impossible just years earlier. The prey animals noticed first. Zebra herds that had run south during previous droughts now found that direction blocked by hungry lions. Running east meant hitting another coalition. West was worse. North led straight into the reserve's deepest territory, where the biggest cats waited. The prey had nowhere to go, and the lions had learned to turn the entire landscape into a trap. This is where Scarface came in. Black rhinos are solitary animals, territorial and aggressive. They don't join herds for protection. They don't have herd instincts to flee in unified directions. A black rhino believes in its own strength, and sometimes that belief is enough. Scarface had survived this long because she was smart. She knew the reserve, knew which watering holes were safe and which were too exposed. She had been avoiding lions successfully for over a decade, but on this particular morning, as the drought deepened and the desperation of every animal in Kruger intensified, something shifted. Rangers later discovered it was a group of 4 pride females that made the first kill on Scarface's young calf just 3 days earlier. The mother had fought back, horns flashing, her 1,000-pound body a weapon she knew how to use. The lions had retreated, but the calf was badly injured. It didn't survive the night. Scarface was grieving and angry when she approached the watering hole on this morning. And grief makes you careless. The first roar came from the north, deep and resonant, carried on the hot wind across 3 kilometers. It was the signal. One of the bigger coalitions, possibly 15 strong, was about to begin their part of the operation. Scarface's head came up from the water. Her ears swiveled toward the sound. She recognized the danger, but by then it was already too late. Two massive males burst from the bush on her eastern flank. They weren't charging to kill, not yet. They were driving her away from the water, away from the open ground, toward the thicker brush where the real trap was waiting. Scarface did exactly what a black rhino should do. She lowered her head, her 4-foot horn pointing straight at the nearer male, and charged. The collision sounded like two trucks hitting at full speed. The lion took the horn directly in the shoulder, the impact knocking him sideways and down. He didn't get up immediately. He was hurt, possibly badly. But his job wasn't to kill the rhino. His job was to make her run, and that he accomplished. Scarface charged after the fallen lion, pursuing him into the thick brush, her adrenaline up, her focus narrowed to the single threat she could see. She didn't see the other 18 until they rose up around her in a coordinated circle. It was a technique perfected over months of hunting together. Drive the target into a specific area, get them focused on one threat, then surround. There was no way out. She was surrounded from every direction, and the lions knew it. What happened in the next moments was a demonstration of predator coordination that wildlife experts later said they'd never witnessed before. The attack came from all angles simultaneously. 3 lions attacked from her left flank. 2 came from the right. 4 moved in from behind, trying to get at her vulnerable rear legs. 2 more targeted her front, snapping at her face, trying to distract her from the threats behind. 6 lions hung back, watching, ready to fill any gaps that appeared in the circle. Scarface was strong and she was fast, and she was furious. She spun 90 degrees and caught one lion on the right side with her horn. The tip caught his side and raked backward, leaving a wound that would scar him for life. He screamed and fell back. Blood was running down her face now. One of the front attackers had gotten a claw through her eye socket, just missing her eye itself. Pain and panic flooded her system, but her survival instinct was stronger. She made a decision. Instead of standing and fighting, instead of trying to face them all and die standing, she broke the circle. She charged straight at the weakest point, where only 4 lions were positioned. They scattered as she ran through, her horn down, her massive body using its weight and momentum like a battering ram. One lion didn't scatter fast enough. She caught him on his chest and threw him sideways into a tree, hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. Then she was running back toward the open ground, back toward the waterhole, back toward the only place in that moment where she felt she had a chance. The lions didn't immediately pursue. They had been hurt. 2 were badly injured from the horn wounds. Another was favoring his back leg. The coordination that had been so lethal a moment before was broken. But then the second group arrived. A coalition of 8 lions that had been waiting on the far side of the reserve came charging from the northwest. They had heard the chaos, heard the roars and the screams of their partners in this unusual hunt, and they came to finish what the first group had started. Scarface was surrounded again, but this time she was wounded. Her breathing was labored. The wound across her face was bleeding heavily, dripping down her neck and onto her shoulder. The second group attacked differently. They didn't try to get at her legs or sides. They went for her face and her neck, trying to get a killing bite, trying to end this quickly. A lion locked onto her muzzle and pulled, trying to tear her head down. Another wrapped around her neck from behind, trying to find the carotid artery. Scarface reared up on her back legs, using her massive strength to throw the lion from her neck. She twisted and caught another lion across the face with her horn, sending him sprawling. Then something extraordinary happened. The rhino changed tactics. Instead of trying to break the circle again, instead of trying to escape, she charged straight at the thickest group of lions. It was crazy, suicidal almost, but sometimes in nature, the only way to survive a trap is to run through the middle of it with everything you have. She hit a group of 4 lions in a coordinated group attack. They weren't ready for a head-on charge of that magnitude. She caught one under her horn and lifted him completely off the ground, tossing him 5 meters backward into the dirt. The others scattered, and before they could regroup, Scarface was moving again, her heavy body moving faster than something that size had any right to move. She ran toward open ground, toward a rocky outcropping about 100 meters away. Lions don't like fighting on rocky terrain. They need mobility. They need space to circle and attack. On rocks, that advantage disappears. Behind her, maybe 20 lions were trying to keep pace, but she was putting distance between herself and them. Her breathing was a harsh, whistling sound. Her left eye was swollen shut from the earlier wound, but she was alive and she was still moving. The first lion that caught her near the rocks was a massive male, probably 300 pounds, with a dark mane that had been matted with blood earlier in the fight. He jumped onto her back from behind, his front legs wrapped around her neck, his teeth snapping at her ears. It was a move designed to bring her down, to tire her out, to make her stop moving so the others could finish her. Scarface ran directly at a boulder, and at the last second, dodged left. The lion on her back had no way to anticipate the move. He slammed into the boulder at full speed, the impact breaking his grip and knocking the wind from him. She kept running. For the next 30 minutes, what happened was less a battle and more a chase. 20 lions trying to bring down one rhino, and the rhino using speed, strength, intelligence, and sheer determination to stay ahead of them. She would run until she found terrain that suited her, then turn and fight long enough to wound one or two of them, then run again. It was a strategy of survival through attrition. The lions were hungry and desperate, but they were also getting tired. Most of them hadn't had a successful full meal in weeks. By mid-afternoon, the hunt had shifted. The lions were no longer coordinating their attacks. Some had fallen back, saving their energy. Others were still chasing, but they were slower now, less confident. And Scarface had made it to an area of the reserve where the terrain was rocky and dense with trees. It was territory that favored the hunted over the hunters. One coalition after another gave up the chase. The last group to quit was a pair of massive males who followed her into a gully and came face to face with her on a slope where they couldn't circle her, couldn't surround her, couldn't do anything except charge head-on. She charged back, and the sound of that collision echoed across the entire sector of Kruger. Both males went down, tangled with her, and for a moment it looked like this was finally the end. But Scarface twisted and drove her horn upward, and one of the males took the point directly in his ribs. He screamed and rolled off, and the other male, seeing his partner hurt, and seeing the determination in this lone rhino's eyes, made the same decision his brothers had made before him. He walked away. As the sun dropped below the horizon, Scarface stood alone in that gully, covered in blood, breathing in ragged gasps, alone in the wilderness of Kruger. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, 20 lions were regrouping, tending their wounds, making calculations about whether this prey was worth any more effort. And they reached a conclusion that would ripple through the entire reserve. She wasn't. A black rhino had survived an attack from 20 lions, not by being the strongest, not by being the fastest, but by refusing to quit, and by understanding that sometimes the only way out of a trap is straight through the middle of it. Rangers found her 3 days later, moving slowly through the reserve, her wounds healing, her body thinner than it had been but alive. They documented her injuries, photographed her for the records, and gave her a new name to replace the one they had been using. They called her Warrior, because that's what she had become. But the story doesn't end there, because what happened in Kruger after this encounter changed everything. The lions had learned that hunting together could bring them to prey they would never have caught alone, but they had also learned something else. Hunting together was dangerous. The injuries they sustained from prey like Scarface took weeks to heal. Some of those injuries got infected. Some of those lions didn't make it. The coordination that had seemed so perfectly adapted to the new reality of the drought was actually a vulnerability. It required trust between animals that had evolved to be competitors. It required agreement between groups that had evolved to fight each other for territory. And as the drought wore on and desperation increased, that agreement started to crack. The first major split happened when a coalition from the south decided they were tired of sharing kills with the groups from the west. A territorial dispute broke out, then another, and then the hunting coalition that had evolved during the drought began to fragment back into the smaller groups it had come from. Within a year, Kruger had returned to its old patterns, with one major difference. The prey animals had learned something during that time too. They had learned that they could run in coordinated herds, that they could help each other survive, that there was safety in numbers if you knew how to use it. When the rains finally came and the drought ended, Kruger didn't return to what it had been before. The ecosystem had been changed by those 5 years of desperation. The lions were different, hungrier, more aggressive. The prey was different, more defensive, more aware. And Scarface, the black rhino who had survived 20 lions, had become a legend. Rangers who worked in Kruger would tell the story of her for years, not as a tale of a victim who barely survived, but as a story of an animal who understood her own strength and refused to surrender to impossible odds. She had cubs after that, 2 of them born to a different male but carrying her genetics, her strength, her refusal to quit. Those cubs survived to adulthood in a park that killed most cubs before they reached a year old. The most incredible part of this story isn't the hunt itself, though that was remarkable. The most incredible part is what happened afterward, because Scarface didn't disappear back into the reserve to live out her days in fear. She became bolder. She started approaching waterholes that other rhinos avoided. She began challenging lions that came near her territory, not with the desperation of that first hunt, but with the confidence of an animal that had already survived the worst. Other black rhinos noticed. In a species that is usually solitary, that fights other members of its kind on sight, something unusual started happening. When lions approached, the rhinos would come together, not in herds like zebra or wildebeest, but in loose groups of 2 or 3. They had learned from Scarface's story. They had seen what one determined rhino could do against impossible odds. Poachers had killed 3 black rhinos in Kruger that year before Scarface's hunt. In the year after, they only killed 1. That's not because Scarface taught them to fight poachers. It's because Scarface taught them to survive, and animals that survive are harder to find. Wildlife researchers called Scarface's encounter the most significant predator-prey interaction they had documented in Kruger in 3 decades. Not because it was the most dramatic or the most violent, but because it changed behavior across species. It changed how the lions hunted. It changed how the rhinos moved. It changed the entire dynamic of survival in that reserve. In the following years, lions began to avoid black rhinos more often than they pursued them. The cost-benefit analysis had shifted. A single black rhino could injure 5 or 6 lions in a confrontation. Even if the rhino died, those injuries could create complications that ultimately killed the predators. It wasn't worth it. Better to hunt zebra or impala or anything else. The lions had learned respect. And Scarface, the rhino that most people in the world will never know about, that will never be featured on nature documentaries or spoken about in wildlife classes, had accomplished something that many predators never achieve. She had changed the equation of her own survival. But what makes this story even more remarkable is what rangers discovered 2 years after the encounter. Scarface's genetic line was unusually strong. Her offspring, both the 2 cubs born after the attack and any cubs those cubs would eventually have, carried genes that made them larger than average black rhinos, stronger than average, with a slightly different horn structure that seemed to give them advantages in combat. It's not something that would happen with humans. We don't automatically see genetic advantages emerge in one generation, but evolution moves differently in the animal world, and sometimes the genes that matter most are the ones that keep you alive when everything is trying to kill you. Rangers began tracking not just Scarface, but all of her descendants, and a pattern emerged. Scarface's genetic line was surviving at rates significantly higher than other black rhinos in the reserve. Her cubs were making it to adulthood more often. Their cubs were surviving longer. Within 10 years, genetic analysis would show that approximately 20% of the black rhino population in Kruger was descended from Scarface. This is what evolution looks like when you're watching it happen. Not over thousands of years, but over decades. Scarface had survived 20 lions through a combination of strength, intelligence, and determination, and in surviving, she had passed those traits forward to animals that would never know her name or know her story, but they would carry forward the same refusal to quit, the same ability to survive against impossible odds. The lions of Kruger, meanwhile, faced their own reckoning. The hunt for Scarface had cost them dearly. 3 lions had died from their injuries in the weeks following the encounter. Another 5 were crippled badly enough that they couldn't hunt effectively. The group that had seemed so coordinated, so efficient, had fractured from the internal disagreements about whether the hunt was worth it. Some lions believed they should target large prey exclusively, arguing that the risks were worth the reward of a full meal. Others said the injuries weren't worth it, and they should focus on smaller game. The group that had unified during the drought slowly dissolved into its original components as these disagreements became more pronounced. Within 2 years, Kruger's lions had completely returned to their old territorial patterns, their old rivalries, their old ways, but the memory remained. And that's the thing about a story like Scarface's. It doesn't just affect the immediate participants. It spreads through the population, changes behavior across generations, influences decisions that animals make without really knowing why they're making them. Lions in Kruger became slightly more cautious around large solitary animals. Rhinos became slightly more confident in their own ability to survive. And somewhere in that reserve, on any given night, if you listen carefully, you might hear a roar that's slightly different from the others. That's the sound of an animal that learned its lesson, an animal that respects the strength of its prey, an animal that knows there are some victories that cost more than their worth. That's the legacy of Scarface. Not a dramatic story of triumph, not a tale of conquest, but something more profound. A story of an animal understanding her own strength and refusing to surrender to impossible odds. A story that spread through an entire ecosystem and changed how a whole community of predators and prey understood survival. The black rhino population in Kruger would face many challenges in the years that followed. Drought would return, poaching would intensify, climate change would alter the very landscape these animals depended on. But they would face those challenges carrying in their genes the legacy of one remarkable animal. An animal that 20 lions couldn't kill. An animal that understood survival isn't about being the biggest or the fastest or the strongest. Sometimes survival is about being the one who refuses to stop fighting. Sometimes survival is about understanding that the only way out of a trap is straight through the middle of it. And sometimes survival is about passing that knowledge forward to the next generation, encoded in your genes, carried in your children, living on long after you're gone. That's what Scarface taught Kruger. That's what 20 lions learned on the day they faced one determined rhino. And that's the story that changed everything.